There is an argument that I've heard used a lot of the time on my videos discussing politics, mainly by market libertarians. Quite often I make arguments against capitalism which talk about certain activities that the state will carry out, such as deploying its military apparatus and waging war in order to satisfy the profit needs of the arms industry and plunder the natural resources of the country being invaded. The response to these arguments from market libertarians is often to make a distinction between capitalism and crony capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system characterized by private ownership of the means of production, exchange of goods and services for profit in a market economy, and wage labour. This sense of the word capitalism will hereafter be referred to as Capitalism 1. For right-wing libertarians, the success or failure of a privately owned business ought to be determined by whether or not it can stand up in the market with competing enterprises. Crony capitalism, on the other hand, describes a situation in which privately owned businesses do not succeed based on their ability to do well in a competitive market, but instead they succeed by controlling the state to rig the market in their favour. This will hereafter be referred to as Capitalism 2. The system we have is Capitalism 2 or crony capitalism, not Capitalism 1 or real capitalism. Market libertarians then go on to argue that crony capitalism happens because of the state. Because the state exercises a lot of control over the economy, it's an institution worth influencing. If you didn't have the power of the state to grant special privileges to big business, then free market capitalism would be a-okay, and you wouldn't have all of the problems that emerge because of the symbiotic relationship between private businesses and the government. Although there is some truth to elements of this argument, there are a considerable number of problems with it. Is it the case that we have Capitalism 2 rather than Capitalism 1? Yes. We, by and large, do not live in a free market system. It is the case that the state plays a substantial role in research and development, privatising the gains and socialising the losses, and propping up big businesses who want to rig the market in their favour. However, the fact that Capitalism 2 exists and Capitalism 1 doesn't is not just because of the state. Capitalism 2 exists and Capitalism 1 doesn't because certain components of Capitalism 1 will lead to the development of Capitalism 2. If you have a system in which the means of production are operated collectively but owned privately, the value created by the collective during the labour process will be appropriated by the private owner. The capitalist mode of production requires that wealth be continually pumped upwards and accumulated by the bosses. In short, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Capitalism 1 requires that class division will be perpetuated on a systematic basis. There will be economic inequality under a capitalist mode of production, and this means that there will be competing class interests. The capitalist class of private owners will have a vested interest in retaining private ownership of the means of production and the consequent economic inequality, whereas the working class will have an economic interest in abolishing private ownership of the means of production and getting rid of the consequent economic inequality. Unless the capitalist class act directly against their own interests, they must establish ways of protecting their class position from the working class and consolidating economic privilege in the long term. Establishing a state apparatus to act in their interests with a monopoly on the use of violence that is perceived to be legitimate is an excellent way of doing that, even if it results in deviation from market principles. The institutions created under Capitalism 1 have a greater economic interest in consolidating their own power than they do with having a free market system. This is why Capitalism 2 or crony capitalism exists and Capitalism 1 doesn't. The idea of having a stateless society but with an economy run by institutions which have a direct economic interest in setting up a state to protect the rich from the poor just isn't feasible. However, there is a way that free market libertarians can salvage their belief in a stateless society with an economic system based on market principles. To quote Mikhail Bakunin, "Do you want to make it impossible for anyone to oppress his fellow man? Then make sure that no one shall possess power." The permanent abolition of the state also requires the abolition of the conditions which give rise to the state. Economic inequality is one such condition which gives rise to the state, due to the need for wealthy economic elites to consolidate their class position. Therefore, the permanent abolition of the state requires the abolition of economic inequality. Private ownership of collectively operated means of production, by its very nature, creates this problem. In order to address this, market libertarians will have to construct an economy run by institutions which do not give rise to economic inequality, institutions which do not create economic elites looking to consolidate their class position, and thereby do not give rise to crony capitalism and statism. Worker-controlled enterprises lack the internal class structure inherent to privately owned and socially operated capitalist businesses, and so they do not give rise to harmful economic elites looking to distort and rig the market in their favour. Because of their flat organisational and economic structure, worker-controlled enterprises are not susceptible to crony capitalism, and as such they are more consistent with a free market than capitalist enterprises. Furthermore, psychological evidence suggests that psychopathic tendencies have a greater prevalence among high-level corporate executives at 3% than the rest of the population at 1%. Not only that, but there have been numerous studies showing that as people accumulate more wealth and power, their capacity to empathise with other people decreases. The main point here is that because people tend to become more selfish as they accumulate more economic power, they may be more likely to make money through dishonest means, whereas worker cooperatives with flat structures are perhaps less likely to engage in such selfish behaviour, thus lowering the tendency for fraud, which again puts the worker cooperatives ahead of conventional businesses in the degree to which they are compatible with free markets. Worker ownership of the means of production is seemingly more compatible with a free market than private ownership, because it simply doesn't lead to the development of economic elites who have an economic incentive to rig the market in their favour. The bottom line is, the market is freer when there's a level playing field, and if you want a level playing field, you should support an equitable economy based on worker-controlled enterprises. Now, this position is what we might call free market anti-capitalism, and I think it's the most appropriate position to take for market libertarians who want to see a stateless society with a market economy without it developing into some kind of crony capitalism where wealthy elites rig the market in their favour. The vision for market libertarians cannot simply be Walmart minus the state, because institutions like Walmart have an interest in setting up a state. Again, as I said, the permanent abolition of the state requires that the preconditions which give rise to the state are also abolished, including but not limited to economic hierarchies in which the capitalist class must oppress the working class in order to maintain its existence. The abolition of the state also requires combating authoritarian social attitudes in general, such as sexism, racism, homophobia, and any other ideology which attempts to ascribe superiority to certain sectors of the population while marginalizing others. In short, there must be no excuse for state power. For further information on free market anti-capitalism, I recommend market libertarians check out the work of Gary Chartier at the Centre for a Stateless Society. Chartier makes a convincing case for free market anti-capitalism in his essay, Advocates of Freed Markets Should Embrace Anti-Capitalism. The essay can be found on the C4SS website and also in video format on the C4SS Videos YouTube channel. Gary Chartier, alongside Charles W. Johnson, also edited a book called Markets, Not Capitalism, a collection of essays and discussions about markets, capitalism, socialism, environmental issues and inequality, arguing for the existence of a free market which is liberated from capitalist control. Market libertarians also ought to look into an essay called Libertarian Class Analysis by left-wing market anarchist Sheldon Richman if they are interested in gaining an understanding of the preconditions which give rise to the state and deconstructing hierarchies of power and privilege. The essay can be found at the C4SS website and on YouTube. Other proponents of free market anti-capitalism include social and political theorist Kevin Carson, a mutualist and individualist anarchist, whose writings include Studies in Mutualist Political Economy and Organisation Theory, a Libertarian Perspective. Perhaps the most well-known free market anti-capitalist anarchist was French political philosopher Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, whose famous declaration that anarchy is order provided the origin of the traditional anarchist symbol of the A inside the O. Proudhon's writings, including What is Property and System of Economical Contradictions, or The Philosophy of Poverty, argue against capitalism and for a free market system of competing worker-controlled enterprises called mutualism or market socialism. With those recommendations aside, I thank you all very much for watching and wish you all the best in your endeavours. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to do whatever you want with it and distribute it in your own way, because intellectual property is theft, copying isn't. If you disagree with my arguments, you're more than welcome to voice your criticisms in the comments section, and I'll do what I can to prevent YouTube's shitty automatic filtering system from marking your criticisms as spam. Thank you for watching, bye bye.